They put the gavel down and the room felt like it had been emptied of air. The judge's voice sounded far away. And when the words life imprisonment came, someone behind me began to cry. I remember thinking, this is the moment a long argument about our country got a face. I was there from the start of that day in Abuja, not as a politician or a lawyer, just a small-time reporter who had followed the story for years. I had seen Nnamdi Kanu on shaky phone videos, on Radio Biafra, and in crowded streets where people burned tires and sang as if a future had been promised to them. That day, I saw him in the dock, quieter than the headlines had made him, but dangerous still in the way people around him folded themselves into either fury or fear. Kanu is the founder of the Indigenous People of Biafra, IPOB, and the voice behind Radio Biafra, a man who for years called for the independence of Biafra and shouted, in his own way, about the things he said were wrong with Nigeria. From what I had watched over the past decade, his path to that cramped federal courtroom was a messy spool of old arrests, a disappearance, and a dramatic reappearance. He was first arrested in 2015, granted bail in 2017, then vanished from public view for a while. An absence that fed rumors and anger in the southeast, only to resurface later abroad. In June 2021, his arrest in Kenya and return to Nigeria became one of those stories everyone argued about. Some said he was renditioned, others said he had been lawfully arrested. The timing and manner of his return only made his trial more explosive. I remember the trial's long rhythm, endless adjournments, lawyers muttering at benches, cameras flashing, and his supporters outside marching with placards. Prosecutors accused him of a string of terrorism-related acts, that his broadcasts and orders incited violence, that he had encouraged illegal shutdowns and attacks, and that he taught tactics they said led to deaths and economic harm in the southeast. For many of us following it closely, those charges were grave and the evidence read like a long list of moments when angry words on air met violent acts on the street. The court found him guilty on 7 counts and, after years of back and forth in Nigeria's courts, he was convicted. What stayed with me most that day wasn't just the verdict, it was how split everyone felt. Outside the court, some said justice had finally been done, that leaders who incite violence must answer. Others treated the conviction like a wound. To them, it was proof that speaking loudly about this country's failures would be answered with force. IPOB and many of Kanu's followers denied the charges and said the trial was political. They called for peaceful self-determination and insisted that their leader had not committed crimes under international law. The crowd's faces were not only angry or triumphant, they were exhausted. Inside, Kanu's behavior made the day feel smaller and sadder. He often represented himself in court, and there were moments the judge removed him for unruly conduct. Watching him try to speak in that courtroom, sometimes loud, sometimes pleading, sometimes defiant, was to see a man whose public power had been reduced to a string of legal protests and a single exhausted voice. Whether you believed him or not, you couldn't deny he had become a symbol, for some a martyr, for others a dangerous demagogue. After the verdict, the small squares of street around the court filled with people sharing videos and talking into phones. People posted arguments the way others might share weather updates, instant, angry, unfiltered. Some tied the conviction to old wounds, the memory of the Civil War and the terrible cost of secession. Others said this was about rule of law, that the state had to be able to protect itself and its citizens. Those conversations reminded me how personal politics are in this country. For many, the abstract idea of reform becomes a question of survival, identity, and dignity. I don't pretend to have an answer to whether the sentence was right or whether the trial was fair in every detail. What I can tell you is what I saw. A man who had used radio and social media to stir a movement, a state that dug in its heels to punish that stirring, and a country that watched and argued as if the future depended on which side won the argument about him. The life sentence the judge handed down was not just a punishment. In many eyes, it was a punctuation to a decade of anger and fear. Walking back from the courthouse that evening, I heard a small boy ask his father if heroes always end up in prison. The father didn't answer quickly. I thought then about the power of speech and about how, in a country as large and messy as ours, a voice on a radio can grow into something that terrifies leaders and comforts followers. I remember the faces in the courtroom, not only Kanu's but the mothers who had come to watch, the soldiers who had guarded the doors, the journalists who tried to write clear sentences out of a fog of emotion. This story is messy because the truth was messy. There were real grievances that people felt Kanu voiced, and there were accusations of violence connected to actions ordered in his name. For many, the trial's end felt like a closing of a chapter. For others, it felt like setting the stage for new tensions. I left the court feeling the old certainty churn, that words matter, and that when a whole people listens, the consequences can be bigger than any one man.